Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all of our distinguished guests, speakers and participants from different organizations and different countries. So welcome to join the 2020 Global NGO Forum on International Development Today. I'm Nina, I'm the Executive Director of Taiwan 8. So I'm also the moderator of the first session. So in this session, we are going to discuss a very important issue, which is the partnership between government and civil society. What's the challenges and how can we transform the challenges into the opportunities so that the government can work very closely with the civil society to make a better world. So in this session, we have 5 speakers from different organizations and countries will share their opinions. They are Mr. Anselmo from Korea. Anselmo, please. Hi. Yeah, and Dr. Cameron here from Australia. Yes. And we have Miss Jennifer from Philippines. And we also have Dr. Jyotsna from India. Yeah, okay. And last one we have Nicolas from Canada. Yeah, so now it's very late in Canada. Anyway. Before we start this session, there is a little bit change for the presentation order. So Mr. Anselmo will go to the last speakers for the presentation, and I hope this is fine for all of our speakers. And I also would like to remind all of our speakers, so each of speakers, you have 50 minutes to deliver your talks. And Q&A will be after all of speakers finish their presentation. So I hope all of the speakers can control your time. Thank you. So the first speaker is Dr. Cameron, the Policy and Advocacy Advisor of Australian Council for International Development. He is going to present the adaptive advocacy and COVID-19 and Australian perspective. Dr. Cameron, please.
Thank you, Nina, and thank you to the conference organizers and the other esteemed members of this panel. It's very nice to meet you online, and I hope you've all been keeping safe and well during this challenging time. My name is Cameron Hill, and I'm a Policy and Advocacy Advisor at the Australian Council for International Development. I'm based in Canberra, Australia, and for those of you who haven't been to our national capital, Canberra is about 3 hours southwest of Sydney. And before joining ACFID, I worked in the Australian government, in the Australian Parliament, and in the private sector. Before I start my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous people of Australia. This is a very important part of Australia's reconciliation and healing process, which has been going on for several decades, but still has some way to go. So I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which I stand, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So perhaps we can go to the first slide of the presentation. So first of all, I'll just give you some background on the Australian Council for International Development. So ACFID is the peak body for Australian non-government organisations involved in international development and humanitarian action. Our vision is one of a world in which people are free from extreme poverty, injustice, and inequality, where the Earth's finite resources are managed sustainably. And our third vision is for a compassionate Australia that acts for a just and sustainable world. ACFID was founded in 1965. We have over 120 members working in about 86 developing countries and supported by about 1.5 million Australians. With our members and our partners, ACFID seeks to be an influential policy voice, a catalyst for change, and a standard bearer for practice in the international development and humanitarian world. You can see from the map, most of our members work in the Asia-Pacific region, but some do have a presence working in the Middle East and Africa. So in terms of how we work, our members bring experience, knowledge, and legitimacy that are essential for ACFID's success. It's our members that shape and carry forward our agenda. And this helps us have influence, a strong political voice, and potential to shape policy. It helps us be part of a wide and very broad network. It helps to shape the unity of our sector. And it also, through our code of conduct for our members, it helps ensure that ACFID members deliver high quality and effective development assistance. And that includes a voice for the beneficiaries, including under our code of conduct, a public complaints process. Next slide, please. So often in development practice, we talk about the importance of adaptive management. But today I'd like to talk about this concept of adaptive advocacy and how it's played out in an Australian context, particularly during the COVID crisis over the last 6 to 8 months. So we know that in our region, COVID-19 has had a range of impacts. Rising poverty and inequality as both a result of the health and economic crisis, a reinforcement of authoritarian politics, including in Asia. We've seen the weakness of state institutions in some countries, but we've seen the strength of institutions and communities in other countries. We've also seen changes in civil society and civic space. We've seen more localized responses as a result of COVID, and we've obviously seen the continued rise of digital civic space as an important mechanism for engaging communities. But as we all know, many of these trends were there before COVID, and COVID has simply accelerated. And similarly for ACFID, while COVID has changed the way we do advocacy, it also has highlighted the ongoing relevance of long-term development approaches that emphasize the basic building blocks of development, such as health, education, gender equality, and livelihoods. So one of the principal aims of our advocacy work here in Australia over the last 6 months is to highlight the links between this crisis and the things that we in the development sector already knew were important. Resilience, preparedness, effective and accountable institutions, and social inclusion. So our advocacy work since the beginning of the COVID crisis has focused on 3, key objectives. The first objective has been protecting the interests of our members and their own financial sustainability during a regional development and financial crisis. In Australia, COVID-19 has changed the face of the Australian economy. This is despite our relative success in managing the health pandemic here in Australia. For the first time since 1991, Australia has entered a recession, and GDP has shrunk by around 7% since March. This fall in GDP is about 3 times worse than our previous fall of 2%, which was in June 1974, which was before I was born. So there have been big slumps in household spending, and most sectors of the Australian economy have contracted. Exports and imports have also fallen sharply. Unemployment has risen by about 3%, and there's continuing forecasts of widespread unemployment in Australia. Some of this unemployment has been masked by the wage subsidies that the Australian government has provided. So for our members and other charities in Australia are facing an intense financial pressure as a result of a drop in public donations and an inability to raise funds through traditional fundraising activities due to mobility restrictions and physical distancing requirements. So one study in Australia has modelled that a 20% fall in revenue for Australian charities and found that under these conditions, about 88% of Australian charities would be making an operating loss. 17% would be at high risk of closing their doors within 6 months. And more than 200,000 jobs could result in the non-government sector. So one of the first pieces of advocacy that ACFID had to undertake in March and April this year was to ensure that the international development not-for-profit sector would be eligible for the government's wage subsidy program, which in Australia, the subsidy program here is called JobKeeper. So we had to work very quickly with other elements of domestic civil society, including faith-based charity and other not-for-profits, to ensure that the wage subsidy would be extended to the non-government sector. And this required working with other parts of the Australian government, our Treasury and Finance Ministry, to ensure that not-for-profits that worked overseas were included in the scheme. And initially, in Australia, charities that worked overseas were not included in the wage subsidy scheme. So this was quite an intensive period of advocacy as critical decisions were being made in a very short time frame. And this required us to mobilise our networks, our supporters, board members, very quickly. Protecting the interests of our members has also included working with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade here in Australia, which provides around 1/3 of our funding and that of our members' funding through its NGO programs. And as some of you may know, the funding for international development here in Australia has been going down successively for about the last 7 years. And Australian investment in ODA is now its lowest on record and is projected to fall further. So the pressures on this funding have increased with COVID. Significant parts of the Australian government's development cooperation program have been reprioritised to address COVID in the region, and we expect further redirection of ODA funds over the coming year. But ACFID has been successful in highlighting the value of NGOs to the Australian government's response, particularly the role of our local partners and networks, given the movement and mobility restrictions, and this has helped protect this funding. Indeed, NGOs have been one of the most prominent parts of the Australian government's regional response, and we expect this will continue because of our comparative advantages. But it's a very tight budget environment here, and given that budget, and the challenges to civil society, both here and in the region, we will need to keep demonstrating our relevance and effectiveness. The second major objective of our advocacy work over the last 6 months has been to advocate for a greater international and regional response to the development challenges of COVID by the Australian government. As we all know, COVID-19 threatens to reverse decades of poverty reduction gains, both in our region and globally. So part of ACFID's advocacy work here in Australia has been to highlight these impacts and call upon the Australian government to fund a larger international response. This has included a call on the Australian government to provide a one-off additional $2 billion increase in Australia's development assistance, focused on meeting the humanitarian, health and economic impacts of the crisis, with a focus on the Indo-Pacific region. As you can imagine, this is a very difficult environment in which to be making this call, because many of our politicians and officials and the wider public and media are focused on addressing the domestic health and economic crisis. So in order to mobilise wider public support, our advocacy work over the last 6 months has included helping build and run a very successful public advocacy campaign called End COVID for All, which has included hundreds of Australian organisations and prominent individuals in the development, health sector and faith-based communities. And the public campaign has engaged with millions of Australians through social media and a joint day of solidarity in August. On the lobbying front, we've been successful in getting access to and making the case to senior policymakers and parliamentarians, many of whom understand that the crisis represents a tipping point for the region, both in development but also geopolitical terms. And one of the most useful advocacy tools we've been using is providing real-term online field briefings to members of the Australian Parliament on the situation in countries like Indonesia, PNG, and Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And our parliamentarians have really appreciated the opportunity to interact and ask questions directly of our members who are working on the ground in these countries.
Dr. Kamala,
in this
our time is up.
Sorry.
Yeah, so will we conclusion your presentation?
Yeah, can you just perhaps 2 more minutes?
2 more minutes. Okay, 2 more minutes.
Thanks. I've been speaking very slowly. So the final part of our advocacy work has been engaging with regional civil society on the importance of localisation. So we know that localisation has been a key theme of the COVID crisis, and we've been using the crisis to highlight the importance of local civil society to Australia's response. And we've been using the crisis to show the breadth and depth of these networks. And this has really helped make the case for a civil society response. But we know the localisation agenda has a long way to go, and there's a risk that after this crisis we'll revert to old patterns. So localisation is an ongoing conversation. And I'll just move to my last slide. So very quickly, on the last slide, the next slide. I'd like to just take this opportunity very quickly to highlight our upcoming annual conference, which for the first time is being co-convened between ACFID, the New Zealand Council for International Development, and the Pacific Islands Association of NGOs, PIENGO. And the theme of this year's crisis is 10 years to 2030, shift the power, raise the ambition. And we expect that localisation and the lessons from COVID will be a key focus. And the conference will be from the 27th to the 30th of October, and you can see the registration details there on your screen. So thank you very much, and apologies for going over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Camilo. So we move to the next speaker. Next speaker is Miss Jennifer, and she is from Philippines. Jennifer is the Deputy Director of IBON International and also has its policy, communication, and training team. So her topic today is strengthening interface to address international development challenges. Jennifer, your turn.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nina Cao, and good morning again to my co-panelists and to everyone participating in this global NGO forum on international development. Just short introduction about IBON International. We are a southern international NGO. While we are headquartered in the Philippines, we also have offices in Africa, in Dakar and Nairobi, and we have also a representative office in Brussels. So, yeah, just an introduction there. So, as Nina said, my input this morning is about strengthening interface to address international development challenges. By interface, IBON International refer to this as a meaningful interaction with state or government representatives and civil society, as well as other development actors and stakeholders. So interface should really be a hallmark of any democratic development process. Next slide, please. As mentioned, so interface governance, part of the governance model, it involves dialogue and engagement, and it is about providing spaces and mechanisms for cooperation, contestation, mutual learning to define appropriate policies and plans, review progress, as well as look into needed adjustments or reforms. And here I would like to highlight contestation, because contestation is important. And for this, we would like to put it out there that dissent is very much part and parcel of democracy and the pursuit of genuine development. So in this governance model of interface, there is really no place for the criminalization of dissent that has been happening in many countries, including in my own in the Philippines. So interface is necessary because this provides opportunities and windows for the people to try to participate in development processes, and it also enables them to exercise their own right as development actors. And on the part of the government or the state, it affirms their role as duty bearers, especially on transparency and accountability to the rights holders. Next slide. But of course, as mentioned by the previous speaker, there are challenges that we are currently facing. And one of them is really crisis in democratic governance. And this is characterized by closing civic spaces that has been also mentioned by our speaker earlier, and also the opening speaker. And in these closing spaces, we point out that, as I mentioned, there is really a growing trend of criminalizing dissent and even the CSOs themselves. So a number of examples are cited, such as Colombia, Philippines, Brazil, Honduras, and India, which, according to recent reports, are among the worst countries for workers and for land and environmental rights defenders. And these are based on evidence gathered by the monitoring of the International Philippine Confederation on the violation of workers' rights, And the Global Witness report documented the killings of land and environmental defenders. So accompanying these closing spaces and criminalization of dissent is, of course, the rise of authoritarianism in various parts of the world. So in my country, this is characterized by repression, extrajudicial killings, and impunity under the current Duterte administration, which have actually been documented in a report by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And as we know, amid the pandemic, new waves of repression happened, and some cited examples are Kenya, China, of course, the Philippines, and where amid the economic crisis and the health crisis that we experience, people's actions calling for better health care, food, and socioeconomic support were repressed as well. Next slide, please. Now, another challenge is also what we call the corporatization of dissent. This is also referred to as the corporate capture of development, to highlight the undue, I underline that, the undue dominance of profit interest in the development agenda. Private entities, market power dominate development policies and processes, and in the process, sidelines civil society. And amid economic crisis and growing constraints on economic rights, we see interest and welfare of communities, the informal sector, and the small private sectors, such as micro, small, and medium enterprises, are also sidelined. We do acknowledge that there should be a nuanced view of the private sector. That's why we, underscore corporatization, putting the burden on corporations who have been violating people's rights. While, of course, recognize this nuanced view, we should have clarity on protecting and serving people's interests, and at all times, between profit and people's interests, we should definitely know where we stand. So the entrenched roles for giant firms, despite the worst unemployment, poverty, and inequalities that have already been mentioned earlier, these also underline that there are development risks, even in the post-pandemic so-called new normal. If it continues to be corporate-driven, the risk of once again prioritizing the corporate bailouts, sidelining issues that have already been exposed by the pandemic, such as health systems weakened by decades of privatization, the multiple burdens of women, and gendered impacts of the economic crisis and pandemic. And all of these point to the need for a transformed and better normal. Next slide. And so, these challenges are, of course, windows of opportunity. And the multiple crises have, while it laid bare the limits of the political and economic paradigms that exist today, it also gives us an opportunity to look into significant shifts, both in politics and in economy. So the question is, are we going to allow the new normal to be again dictated by profit interests that have undermined the welfare of both the people and the planet? So, and I pose the challenge to every one of us here. So stark political and economic inequalities today highlight really the need to expand people's substantive participation and ownership as part of the solutions to these structural problems. And this is really where interface, interaction in a meaningful way between development actors, the government, civil society, and other stakeholders are really important. Next slide, please. So speaking of interface possibilities, interface, of course, should happen at all levels of governance. So at the level of, at the local level, the national, sub-national levels, national agencies with sectoral and community-based organizations should be, undertaking dialogue and conversing about development and issues affecting the country. And interface can be initiated either by people's organizations and CSOs, or of course the government representatives or national or local authorities themselves. And at the international level, I cite here two examples where interface happens. One is within the framework of dialogue with the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD and CSO. And this is facilitated with the DAC CSO reference group, which is the only CSO platform with the objective of being an interlocutor between the DAC and CSO, and which facilitates also the exchange of information between them. And in fact, this October, we will be having a meeting, a dialogue in preparation for the next high-level meeting of the DAC. Another example is, of course, the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, the GPEDC, which was formed in Busan, South Korea, where for the first time democratic ownership was acknowledged in the outcome document. So in this space, the CSO engagement is organized and facilitated by the open platform called CSO Partnership for Development of Peace, which I think, or CPD, which I think many of us are familiar. So those are just some of the examples of interface possibilities, whether at the national, sub-national, local, or international. Next slide. Now, even international calls for the strengthening of the interface, because strengthening interface means strengthening also ownership of development processes. To leave no one behind, it is essential to work for national and local policies and state positions in international development discourse. That we say all these should be informed and shaped with the concerns of those who are most affected. So interface is crucial in promoting social transformation towards people-powered democracy. By people-powered democracy, we simply mean that the people are capacitated to claim their rights as well as their sovereignty are respected. So people-powered democracy, of course, is for an unempowered civil society. It entails also having an enabling state where governance responds to the people's concerns and protects and fulfills civil and political and economic rights of the people. And of course, people-powered democracy is also about economic democracy, where people have access, control, and benefit from the wealth of the made or created in their societies. Last slide. And so, amid all the challenges and the opportunities that I have discussed with you, in the end, we say that in this new normal, what we really need is greater solidarity among our peoples. We need solidarity to actualize commitments in development cooperation and partnerships. Of course, towards strengthening the voices of CSOs and people's organizations in national and international practices. Because we do call for everyone to promote the essence of development, cooperation, and partnerships as being people-powered and advanced international. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. Yes. So next we'll move to India. So the third speaker is Dr. Jyotsna Mohan, and she is the regional coordinator of Asian Development Alliance, ADA. So her talk is, the topic is civil society and government relationships in context to Agenda 2030 of Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah. Dr. Jyotsna?
Thank you so much, Nina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, whichever part of the world you are in. My name is Jyotsna, and I'm the regional coordinator for Asia Development Alliance. Asia Development Alliance is a network, a regional platform for Asian national coalitions, and we have about 20 countries as a member and about 30 national coalitions. So part of ADA. We work primarily on sustainable development, using it as a tool to voice up our opinion, and we believe a lot of partnership, solidarity with the various stakeholders, and apart from working with our members, we also work with our various partners across the globe. So thank you so much for having me for this very important forum. And I will be discussing the CSO government engagement, in the total Agenda 2030 perspective. So there has been a lot of discussion about how the engagement process should be, and this Agenda 2030 of the Sustainable Development Goal also talks a lot about multi-stakeholder partnership, or we hear commonly used term called, triangular engagement. So government, CSOs, and the private sector are three very important pillars of the engagement and SDGs implementation, monitoring, and mechanism process. So I would like to present the view from the civil society and our experiences basically in Asia in last 2 years. Next slide, please. So as we know that, this is 2020, so we completed our 5 years of SDGs implementation. 15 September, they started in 2015. Formally, they started. SDGs have become a very important framework to address issues of poverty, eradication, efforts, and development policies are also structured at the global level. And they were also talked about, considered about there would be a good game changer in terms of increasing awareness among everyone, among policymakers, among communities, governments, private sector, and other stakeholders, and also galvanizing support apart from, framing the broader debate around poverty reduction. They also have been very, very valuable in contexts where they provide the only available entry point for discussion of contentious issues. So what are these issues? There are some issues which we have been overlooking it, or the governments are not paying much attention to it. So I'll come to those points later. So basically the SDGs, but the whole SDGs, someone needs to implement it, and they cannot be implemented by themselves. And here, the governments and the corporate sector, they also cannot be expected to suddenly reverse course of issues of major importance to these unless the assumptions surrounding empowerment and partnerships are taken seriously. Mind it, empowerment and partnership. So are we really into the partnership thing? Next slide. So, I would also like to highlight some things like SDGs repeatedly use the terms related to transformation, empowerment, collaborations, and inclusion. We feel that after all these years, sometimes we feel that are these really illusory concepts? Do they really exist? Because despite 20 mentions of human rights in the text of SDGs, there is not a single reference to any specific civil and political rights. And human rights in general remains marginal and often invisible in the overall SDGs context. Next slide. And today, what do we see? We are not in track in achieving the Agenda 2030 of SDGs. SDGs of Agenda 2030, because SDG is a part of whole Agenda 2030. If I talk about Asia, I'm also mentioning sometimes Pacific because we work very closely with our CSO mechanism called APRCEP. So we often get into the Pacific as well. So we see that despite progress on some goals like goal 4, which is education, some goals are stagnant and some are even regressing, like goal 12, 13, and 13 is also, climate justice. And then we also have goal 16, which talks about inclusion, justice, transparency, governance, inclusive institutions. All these important aspects are somewhere left behind. We know Asia is a home to the fastest growing economies. The region also has millions of poor and undernourished people, and multi-dimensional crises being lived by the people, which is characterized by public health crises, especially during the time of COVID-19 pandemic. And there has been severe wealth inequality, environment and climatic crisis, as well as the crisis of democratic rights and good governance. The pandemic also has further exposed how the neoliberal capitalism has failed to protect people's rights and to deliver people's need, including access to quality public healthcare and universal social protection. Next, please. So the situation in Asia is basically we see inequality. There is income inequality, there is wealth inequality, there is inequality in education. The very small thing, I would just give example that other day I was talking, my daughter is studying in a very good school, and we also have a help. And my daughter was writing her half-yearly exams online, and I asked my help. So you also have your granddaughter, the same age of my daughter. So what is she doing? And she said, no, ma'am, she's not going to any school. 1 year is completely wasted. And I was shocked because she was very close to where I live. So I would just give a small example how this educational inequality for the better off, it's easy to access education, the online education, but for the worse off, they cannot, for them, 1 year is wasted or until the COVID pandemic is here. So I would just give, this is how Asia, there are many parts of Asia, especially in Southeast and South Asia, we see a lot of, there's such inequality. Apart from that, there is inequality with water and sanitation, health crises, sexual and reproductive health. There are many other social services which the better off has better access. And this is also coupled with the increasing privatization and marketization of education, health, other social services across the region. Then there's social inequality as the discriminating against the poor, widen gender disparity, and marginalization of vulnerable groups undermine the public system. Next slide, please. And there is some progress in ending poverty. A significant number of world's extreme poor are still living in South Asia, which means the progress we are making is very insufficient. And current global and national economic models are rigged against women and marginalized groups that we see here. And over 60% of Asia Pacific people will lack access to social protection. So what we need from the government, we need a lifelong social security guarantee for all people, including healthcare and income inequality, income security, and gender disparity in education continues to persist within countries and across countries. This disparity is very, very prevalent in Southern Asian countries. And you see a lot of dropouts in about 18.7 million children are out of the school in the region. due to the pandemic. Similarly, we see in the water and sanitation, the negative trends are seen below 2000 level. The water and sanitation goal. Around 1.6 billion people in the region lack access to basic sanitation. An estimated 260 million also lack access to clean water at home. So, tracking the goal on health and well-being, that goal 3 shows uneven progress in regards to maternal mortality reduction, neonatal and child mortality across countries. Many more of the region are lacking access to affordable healthcare. Estimates indicate that over 4 in 10 people in the region have no access to health care, posing great danger to achievement of universal health care. Next slide, please. We see more slides of health. I would like to go a bit faster with the next slide I wanted to say. So this is all about health, how government needs to ensure universal access to health coverage. In gender, as we have seen that Asia, especially South Asia, is home to a lot of gender inequality. So government needs to ensure the full realization of women's human rights, revoke all gender discriminatory legislation, policies and practices that contribute to gender inequality, and end harmful practices including child, early and forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and honor killing, which is very, very sadly, which is very much part of, again, South Asia. And in finance and trade, government needs to ensure clear financing strategies. Financial resources needs to be achieved. I mean, we really need a lot of money to achieve SDGs. So there is not such clear concept about this. There are some policies. They also have offered indigenous families wherein they have resulted in migration of tribal farmers for their homeland, affecting their livelihoods and aggravating the vulnerable conditions of women and children. Environment, we know again the issues of environment. Governments of GEC must address human well-being, because human well-being is one of the entry points that we discussed this year when we were reporting to the SDGs. There were 6 entry points, and human well-being is one entry point, which is cross sectoral, include goal 1, 2, 4, 13, 12, 11, 16, and many more goals. So that is human well-being. So government needs to address all these intersectoral goals. Environment injustice and gender inequality by empowering people and social movement on environmental public goods. Government should create space for people's participation to improve their understanding on science, policy, society, cooperation to achieve SDGs. Citizens-led data, we have been talking a lot about citizens-led data using, because civil society has a lot of data and government has not yet acknowledged it. Apart from that, science and technology facilitation mechanism through North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation based on common but differentiated responsibilities and guided by the precautionary principles must be put in place to accelerate the SDGs linked with the GEC entry point, and world must move away from the reliance on the free market mechanism, which is already proven inefficient and inadequate to combating global environmental challenges. And the shrinking civic space, which is, we have been talking since ages. I think we'll be talking until ages, but in ADA, we have come up with a couple of studies on goal 16. We launched one last year, we launched this year also during high-level political forum, and this we talked about realizing the potential of goal 16 of the 2030 agenda to promote and protect civil space. You can click at the link and see what is there in the study. The study is based on 18 countries, and despite again mentioning a lot of issues related to shrinking civic space, no voluntary national review so far has ever mentioned the issues. So that's again a pity. And the responses of COVID-19 in many countries have only made the situation worse, as government have opportunistically used the pandemic as a justification to further clamp down on forms of civil society engagement that are indispensable for the SDGs to be promoted effectively. And we have seen, government needs to retract the restrictive and repressive laws. Just in COVID, Government of India, they have the FCRA, Foreign Competition Regulation Act. Yes, I will just finish in 1 minute. So there has been a lot of repressive acts that the government is forcing. And what happens usually in South Asia, what the government of India is coming up with some regressive act. The neighboring countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, immediately their government, they also follow the same suit because they're all failing. They all fear and they feel challenged by the civil society. So what do we feel that is very important? Our recommendation is to give importance to understand the citizens-led data, as I mentioned before. We also need the government must recognize and accept the results from citizens-led data. This could be done by using both qualitative information and quantitative that the civil society is being doing. Bottom-up approach, our previous speaker also talked about the localizing SDGs, VLR called voluntary local interviews. Some of the ways where the local government, the local people, they can come up and they can work, can engage with the government and the local authorities, and that's how the localizing of SDGs is very important.
Dr. Jyotsna, your time is up.
Okay, so
yeah, please conclude your presentation.
Okay, so just last one. The people of Asia, we have the answers to how to accelerate transformation towards sustainable development. All over the region, grassroots communities are coming up with solutions. For example, on how to assert their rights to land and other resources. Indigenous people, they know how to they have shown us the way to manage an equitable share resources. Workers and small enterprises have initiated on sharing and caring enterprises. Government's action and protection of people's rights are key if these solutions are to contribute to the acceleration towards sustainable development within this decade. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. So our next speaker is Nicolas Moyer. Yeah. Now it's very late in Canada. Yeah, Nicolas is the CEO of Canadian Council for International Cooperation, CCIC. But as I know now, they changed the new name. The name is Cooperation Canada. So he is going to share the experience of Canadian civil society, especially the international development sectors, in building the effective relationship with the Federation of Governments of Canada and supporting of the civil society activities. Nicolas, please.
Well, thank you. Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you. And it is indeed very late where I am, but good morning to everyone. I really want to thank you for having me. And before I get started, as I heard Cameron do earlier, I do want to recognize that I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. They're the original peoples who inhabited the land where I am in the city of Ottawa in Canada before it was colonized by European settlers, and they still inhabit and steward this land. And it's something we keep in mind. This colonial history is so important to how we view the world today. The theme of our panel is to address opportunities and challenges of partnership between civil society and government. It's a huge topic. It's one that merits great attention, and I'm certainly glad to participate today. I think that forum participants don't need to spend much more time talking yet about the importance of civil society and NGOs, civil society organizations and NGOs. We know it already. In fact, the consensus statement that has been shared with the forum is really a great outline. And I want to congratulate forum organizers for this statement. Because forum organizers requested it of me, I'll enter this topic of opportunities and challenges in civil society and partnership with government by talking a little bit about Cooperation Canada. In Canada, we did change our name just a few days ago, but also in our experience with partnering with the Canadian government. And Others have talked about interface. I heard Jennifer talking about the SDGs from Jyotsna. Cameron gave us a good example of a campaign. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the how of effective government and CSO partnership. I'll start by just briefly saying about Cooperation Canada that we have a 52-year history with the National Association of International Development and Humanitarian Organizations. We have about 90 members in our membership, but our sector is over 2,000 organizations that collectively mobilize over $5 billion a year to invest in social justice globally. And even if this may sound impressive, actually in relative size, it's important for you to know there are over 140,000 nonprofits in Canada. There are over 80,000 charities in this country. And Cooperation Canada brings together and advocates for Canada's international development humanitarian organizations by convening sector leaders, influencing policy, and building capacity. We really do want to work together with partners both inside and outside Canada to build a world that's fair, safe, and sustainable for all. Now, we are a network of members structured to support our membership in the pursuit of more and better international development assistance. We do this really through four main means. And so convening is a critical piece of what we do through conferences and events, meetings, and so on. Secondly, we work extensively in research and analysis, which supports our sector at a broad level across particularly issues that they would not cover individually. We have a very diverse membership, large and small, every thematic from food security to gender equality to health and many other topics. So we'll focus at overarching issues with respect to our research and analysis and issues that affect the sector as a whole. Thirdly, we focus extensively on engaging with government. It's really one of our core mandates. And then fourthly, we'll provide capacity building services and support for many of our members, particularly the smaller and medium ones. And so I do want to give a couple of examples of policy successes we have had. And I think there have been many in a 52-year history, but some are really significant because they've been about enshrining how it is that we work with government. And probably most significant is something that we call the ODA, so Official Development Assistance Accountability Act. And this is legislation passed by the federal government in Canada a little over 10 years ago that requires official development assistance to serve to alleviate poverty and to include the interests and considerations of the people that are directly targeted by ODA. And it's been a really pivotal legislation for us to engage with government. More recently, the present federal government brought in place, after 2 years of consultation with civil society and our membership in particular, a feminist international development policy. And this is really a policy framework that really enshrines a focus of our international assistance on women and girls and addressing gender equality. It's actually been an extraordinary outcome of a 2-year process of engagement, consultation, and influence by our stakeholders with government. There are many other examples. We've worked to advocate effectively on a number of things, including enshrining government approaches to defending human rights defenders around the world and adapting its foreign affairs infrastructure to support human rights defenders. We've advocated for increased funding. We've advocated for Canada to sign on to global agreements, whether we're talking about the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the arms trade treaties or others. I will say we have not always been successful. Advocacy is an ongoing challenge. There's many places where we would like to do better. We'd like to push our government to do more on localization, overall spending on ODA. But I do want to actually take a moment to talk specifically about one thing. And in the last 5 years, working with government, at a macro level, really what we seek to do, because as you know, and it's this topic of this whole conference, is that actually the relationship between civil society and government is a complicated one. There are so many pressures on that relationship, And depending on how governments evolve, the relationship can get frayed very quickly with civil society. And we certainly have lived that in Canada in the past. And so we really do have an approach overall, over many years, of very much entrenching commitments to collaboration in both legislation, in policy, in funding by government, and in practice. And there's really one thing we worked incredibly hard on, and that was developing something called, by Global Affairs Canada, which is our foreign affairs, something called the CSO Partnership Policy. The CSO Partnership Policy has 5 guiding principles. These are Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy. They are the 2030 Agenda for the SDGs. They are Canada's Official Development Assistance Accountability Act, which I referenced earlier. They are international human rights commitments, and they are the Istanbul Principles for CSO Development Effectiveness. Now, there are 9 objectives within that CSO partnership. It's a very elaborate policy. I invite you to go and actually look it up. You could just Google it and find it. I'm happy to share the link. It also has 9 objectives. So those objectives are to empower women and girls, and it's in line with the Feminist International Assistance Policy, to facilitate a safe and enabling environment for civil society, protecting human life and dignity, fostering CSO leadership and innovation, integrating the role of CSOs as independent actors into international development assistance programming, and more. But really what is significant about this policy is it was developed in collaboration with civil society, and we have now developed action plans for each of the 9 objectives. And so we have shared tables, actually very much in the interface kind of language that Jennifer was talking about earlier, that actually where we have joint tables between civil society actors and government actors that actually have set action plans for each of those 9 objectives, and now have an ongoing process, which we're just beginning now, of regular tracking year over year. We have obviously had to advocate for issues large and small with government, and some of those are quite tactical. You can imagine that in grants and contributions, there are lots of things that can be points of friction in our relationships with government. And so we've really advocated for solution finding in ways that are collaborative. We have lobbied government essentially to create solutions teams with civil society actors to work out solutions to problems, propose those up to decision makers so that they can be actioned. Now, we've had a lot of successes, and I must say I think we're very privileged in Canada with respect to the space for civil society, but it has not always been that way, and we've had very difficult periods in our history. And those remind us of the importance of investing in the many layers of collaborative work with government. I'll also say that it's never easy. So the relationship is always difficult and frustrating, and it takes constant work because there are inherent challenges to working with government from a civil society perspective. You know, I think you will all agree that a well-functioning society that can ensure progress meets the needs of everyone, it requires 3 strong, independent, and distinct sectors in public, private, and civil society. You know, without a robust civil society, there is no democracy, period. But we all want government to play its role, and civil society sort of wants government to do what it's supposed to do to take care of people. And we know that civil society can't do it all. We have to be encouraging government to do more. And so we have to look at the relationship and what that looks like for us to be effective. We have to actually understand what the differences are. The relationship between government and civil society is a very unequal one. Government is much larger, it has authority, it has funding, it is centralized, it has a large internal hierarchy, it has a longer term view oftentimes. By contrast, civil society has no legal authority, we have little funding, we're very decentralized, we're fragmented in many respects, we have no hierarchy, and we often can have very short-term lenses. There's always inherently also a tension between seeking funding and holding to account government and ensuring effective consultations. An ideal state would be for each to respect the other, working together to deliver important programs. But effective partnership in the long run really requires an understanding of the priorities and perspectives of each. And that's That's rare between people, and let alone organizations or whole sectors like government and civil society. To government, civil society may seem self-serving, disorganized, divided, lacking long-term focus or broad expertise. To CSOs, government can seem bureaucratic and slow and too rigid, or lacking ability to innovate, focused on the wrong things, big and hard to influence. But we need to own our role fully as civil society, as constructive actors. And it's a goal in and of itself to secure support and recognition for civil society. We can never assume that we're okay and that we'll be respected and included by government. In fact, we should always assume that civil society is in danger or losing recognition, and beware and not be complacent. So here are some of the strategies that we pursue, and we do take a long-term approach. Democracy, frankly, is messy, and sometimes it's slow to lead to change. So we've taken the following general approaches. We invest in strong sector coalitions. So we find ways of ensuring that they have adequate capacity and connections between them and within them. So the stronger are our sectors, the more influence we can have. So we need to help each other. And that takes time and it's hard to do. We do develop and demonstrate strong subject matter expertise, so knowledge and expertise. We do this through data that we bring together, through analysis and evidence, experts, public polling, things that demonstrate our competence in what we bring to the table. We create networks in areas of extensive knowledge. We convene a lot of events and experts, and we invite government to those. Working in a nonpartisan manner is incredibly important to us. We will not pick sides in politics. We spend time developing relationships with all parties. And it's important for us to transition, to manage those transitions, to manage risk. We'll focus on creating personal ties and relations to government in extensive and strategic ways, not just with political actors and all parties, but also public servants and the bureaucracy. And those need to be managed in very different ways to be complementary for us to advance our objectives. It's important for us to hold government to account. It's one of the core mandates of civil society. And so fact-checking, holding up past commitments, challenging poor and unacceptable actions, comparing to global norms are ways that we hold government to account. We also celebrate, and this is something we don't do enough, celebrate when government does something good. That's often a lot harder to do, to mobilize, to celebrate something good. We have to give government both a carrot and a stick. So we use our networks with the public to do this and other things. And I would say that around saying when a government does something well, it's important to be able to do that because everyone likes to be the best at something. So we use that appetite for leadership as a way to celebrate, champions and encourage government to do more. In fact, I'm talking to a Taiwanese audience, and in your case, you've done so well in managing COVID. This is a point of pride among others that you have. And so how can that be leveraged to champion further and more? I'll say we have had many challenges in Canada. We have sometimes succeeded, but we've often failed. We've had very difficult years with a previous government a decade ago that actually really cut a lot in our sector and challenged us in important ways. And it's in those moments that we learn to work better together and hopefully that we'll be able to be more resilient in the long run. But we all need to be resilient. I know you all are too. And I will just stop there and look forward to where the conversation goes from here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicolas. Yeah, even now is the midtime, but still very full of energy. Yes, good. So our last speaker is Mr. Anselmo. He is instead of Mr. Jin Hong Song. So in your proceeding, actually, we have as Jin Hong Song, Vice President of KOICA. But as Mr. Song, he cannot join us. So
we cannot hear you.
Huh? Yes. So Mr. Anselmo Lee will instead to join us. So Anselmo is the non-executive board member of KOICA, and he is also an adjunct professor of Global Academy of Future Civilization at KOICA Yonghee University. So his talk.
I cannot hear you.
Sorry. Anselmo, can you hear us?
No, we can't hear you now.
Anselmo, can you hear us? Anselmo, can you hear us?
Now it's okay, yeah.
Can you hear us now?
Yep.
Yeah, right? You can hear us. Are you okay?
Yes, can hear you now.
So can we start your presentation? Can you hear us?
Yes, can I speak now?
Yes, so your talk is government, civil society, partnership in response to COVID-19. So please.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Anselmo Lee. I'm here to speak on behalf of KOICA, Korea International Cooperation Agency. I think I attended one of your conference several years ago. That time I was representing CSO, but here today I'm representing government agency, even with KOICA. I'm going to present to you briefly about what has been prepared by KOICA, and then at the end I will share my own observations on the topics. I'm here as a non-executive board member of KOICA, which means I'm not full-time. I was appointed as like an external member representing the sector partners because I have been involved in the civil society and also a bit of academic as well. In fact, I'm very happy to join this panel because I see some of my old friends, Jyotsna from ADA, because I was one of the founding members of ADA, and also Jennifer from IBON. We have been working together on Busan partnership, which she mentioned during her presentation. Okay, now get into the PowerPoint. Briefly about KOICA, I'm sure you know very well about JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency. So like JICA, KOICA is a government agency. And unlike other countries, we have two types of international cooperation. One is a loan, the other one is aid, grant. So KOICA is in charge of the grant. Total budget for grant is about, soon, I think next year we reach 10 billion US dollar. Total amount of the ODA is about slightly less than 3 billion. Out of 3 billion, about 60% grant, and also 3% of the grant will go through and to CSO, But as you may know, the OECD DAC, Development Assistance Committee, average is about 18 points. So Korea is much lower than international standard. And also, generally, as you know, the UN recommendation is 0.7 of ODA per GNI. Korea reached now 0.15, and this is one of the lowest among the OECD DAC member countries. But Korea has increased the ODA rapidly over last 10 years. So now Korea is Korea increase of ODA is one of the highest over last 10 years. And very interesting, Nicolas said, sometimes we need to celebrate when government is doing something good. I think this is a case of South Korea because I'm a little bit not embarrassing, but I'm not used to celebrate or praise the Korean government because when I was CSO, I used to criticize a lot, of course, constructive manner. But this time, in the face of COVID-19, as you know, many government has been shrinking their budget, reducing their ODA budget. But Korean government decided to maintain, even increase the ODA budget because although we are facing a lot of challenges domestically, because there are people in developing countries, they are facing even severe challenges, more difficult situations. So in the spirit of international solidarity, government decided to maintain the budget. I think this is a good sign of the spirit of international cooperation. Of course, CSO has been demanding and also campaigning to maintain the ODA to support developing countries. Okay, can you show the next slide? I cannot see the slide in my... Okay, basically this slide is about what KOICA and also CSO has been doing in response to COVID-19 challenges. Okay, so you can see the content. The next, please. I just want to show, since time is very short, I don't want to explain every slide, just show around. I mentioned briefly, okay, this is how KOICA understand COVID-19 in terms of SDG, starting from the health, goal 3, but now goal 16 and goal 17 all are related to COVID-19. So KOICA has been developing very comprehensive action plan, not only goal 3, the health, but also the governance and also the partnership as well. Next, please. Next, please. It's very slow, I'm sorry. Okay, next one, please. This is a time gap. What I see in the screen and also what I see in the YouTube are different. So I don't know which one I'm supposed to use. Anyway, so please show the next one. So this is how KOICA understand the impact of COVID on human rights and civic space. As you know, KOICA has been working and developing program around SDG 16. SDG 16 deals with the governance, more specifically violence and anti-corruption and human rights and rule of law, because KOICA sees SDG 16 is very important to make ODA more effective in developing countries, strengthening the governance. From that angle, KOICA also looking at COVID-19, so beyond public health crisis. So very interestingly, there were a lot of also a lobby campaign. The international CSO sent a letter to President of South Korea, urging Korea to play more proactive role in supporting developing countries, but not only humanitarian crisis, but also human rights and governance, the civic space. Because, as you know, there has been a lot of shrinking civic space and also deterioration of human rights in many countries in the context of COVID-19. So KOICA want to see also as well, the importance of civic space in combating COVID-19 in response to this letter. The next, please. So KOICA program is in the name of ABC. ABC means Agenda for Building Resilience Against COVID-19 through Development Cooperation and Save Life, Save a Livelihood. So it's beyond the health, because many countries, they are suffering from the impact of COVID-19. It's not only health, but also jobs and livelihood. So in the process of recovery, KOICA trying to support beyond the humanitarian assistance, so long-term recovery effort to restore the livelihood through the SDG and human rights framework. So KOICA has developed the STOP principles and solidarity, trust, ownership, and partnership, and also speed, transparency, openness, and participation. This is based on not only the Korean COVID-19 the experience, but also according to international standard, particularly SG16 and human rights. So according to this principle, KOICA has developed various specific project and program in the name of ABC. But very interestingly here, KOICA created a special fund on COVID-19 through and two CSOs, about $7 million through which directly supporting local CSOs in many developing countries. This is a very clear case of government civil society partnership. Let me share with you, what you see in the slide is explanation about KOICA policy and response to COVID-19. Can you see the next one? I want to show the Korean government CSO policy framework because Nicolas from Corporation Canada mentioned about policy framework. Similarly, Korean government and CSO adopted policy framework for government civil society partnership, which is very important. It's a policy document. And now, together with the government, CSO are developing the operationalizing this policy framework in the context of COVID-19. So the $7 million special fund, one of the ways to operationalize this government civil society partnership. The next slide, I think you see the structure framework of this government civil society partnership. Because this partnership, I'm sure that you will see soon, this is a result of OECD DAC Development Assistance Committee. As you know, this year, it's the 10th anniversary of Korea joining OECD DAC. And also next year will be also 30th anniversary of KOICA. So after joining OECD DAC, Korea, like any other countries, received the regularly so-called peer review, whether Korea follow faithfully the OECD DAC guideline. The latest one was 1917. The one of the recommendations from OECD DAC was, let me read, quote, Korean government should clarify and deepen the partnership it seeks with the civil society through a normative framework acknowledging the different roles of civil society, including as an implementing partner and as an independent development actor in its own right. This recommendation was very important because Korean CSO used this recommendation to urge Korean government to develop a policy framework, normative framework, and also acknowledging the role of civil society. This is an outcome of the Busan partnership. As you may know, 2011, now you can see the full text of this policy framework. The Busan high-level forum on aid effectiveness, OECD forum, and there we were able to come up with the kind of consensus on the role of civil society, particularly civil society as the independent developed actor in its own right. So now you can see this, the wording in the OECD recommendation. So according to this recommendation, there has been 2 years work, collaboration, and then finally we have this framework. Here we can see the roles of civil society in Korean context and also principle. As Nicolas mentioned, we have also several principles in line with the international norms and also goal and objective. Can you go down, really? And also in the commitment, develop effectiveness was mentioned as one of the objectives. Here, the implementation measures, I want to highlight A4, operate with the civil society in developing countries. In other words, localization, as mentioned by the many previous speakers. How to empower local civil society. I think this is one of the most important challenges and also missions that we need to do together. Especially here, we have a panelist from Australia and also from Canada. How to support human rights defenders and develop practitioners working in the very difficult situation like the Philippines, these days in Pakistan and India. So I think this is our common challenges. At the same time, objective we need to achieve together. And lastly, I want to mention about my own observation about government civil society partnership. I think this very much depend on democratization in many countries, especially the developing countries. Unfortunately, the ODA has been, of course, very useful for poverty eradication, but not necessarily for democratization. So this is a very important issue because effectiveness of ODA very much related to the democratization process in developing countries. But as Nicolas said also, democracy is not only for developing countries, for every country, including Korea. So we have democracy up and down, and sometimes we have a conservative government and then liberal government. And so that's why, from our own experience, it's important to establish the more stable policy framework, less influenced by the change of government. In that sense, this policy framework is very important because now we have a more stable policy framework. We can work together, not only within the one single government, either conservative or liberal. So this process was important. And then also from CSO point of view, I think empowerment and also professionalization of CSO is very important because now the ODA size has increased a lot. So which require more professional management of ODA, according to international standard. So that empowerment in the CSO in both developing countries and the partner countries, these days we call partner countries or developed partners, I think that's also equally important. So that overall, we can promote mutual partnership and also mutual ownership so that the quality of ODA can improve in developing countries. Let me stop here. So thank you for listening. If there are any questions, I will elaborate a little bit more.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Anselmo. So thanks all of our speakers. Could you get all of speakers the big hand? Yeah, for all speakers. Thank you so much. So now it's open for the floor discussion. So if you would like to ask question, please identify your name and organization and the question addressed to which speaker. Yeah, anyone would like to ask question? Now open for question, please.
Hello. My name is Lisa Wu. My organization is Lisa AI School. I want to know if just like a regular people like me, how can I contribute to involve with the NGO? That's my question.
You want to ask
Yeah,
which
it's just
speaker?
like anyone who can answer my question, because I just like ordinary people. I haven't joined the NGO, but I travel a lot, and I really interested about how can I contribute to like a regular citizen, but can help the like people know about Taiwan. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so who can answer? Anselmo. You have most experience.
I think you have a Taiwan, every country, this association of NGOs. In Korea, we have a KCOC. Taiwan also, we have Taiwan Aid. I think you can contact them. I think they will share with you all the necessary information, Please join one of the NGOs so that you can participate in the activities and also you can contribute financially,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer, you in charge of the training, so
Yeah,
you can answer.
I would also like to add that, for example, for IBON International, we do accept interns and volunteers. So whether from the local in the Philippines or coming from different countries, whether it's for schoolwork or just you want to be contributed to the work of CSOs. So our doors are. You can visit our website, some information there how to apply for internships to good quality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so my recommendation, join more activity of Taiwan Ed.
Okay.
You will learn a lot.
Exactly.
I will, definitely.
Jiehong, you want to answer question? Yeah, please.
Hello, my good friend. I'm Jay Hong from Taiwan Aid. I have a question for you all because after we listen for the lecture from Sam, he talked about innovation and talk about how civil society can work with private sector to utilize the market power. But in the same time, we hear lots of presentation about beware about the market power. It's become a corporate-driven process. Then maybe the civil society will lose their position. So what's the fine line between those two? What's the most important or the crucial boundary you see in that? Because we need, or we live with the market, but we need that in a way we don't want to be hurt by it. So how do you say about it?
Okay, our speaker would like to answer question. Okay, for Nicolas, can you answer that? Give some comments.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to jump in. Thank you, Jay, for your question, and I'm sure everyone has an opinion about it. I think that there is a lot of potential in working with the private sector. However, as civil society actors, I think that our first responsibility is to be advancing the principles that we uphold. And you ask, what is the line? I think the line is where you think that you're still making positive progress. And I think that's not always obvious, because working with the private sector really requires an alignment of vision and intent. And it is important to be sure that that vision and intent is there. I think that in all collaboration, in all partnership, this would be true even with another organization in civil society. You would be seeking to validate that you have the same views or that you are working towards the same objectives. That's even more important with the private sector, where you know that there is a for-profit objective. And so, I think civil society always has to ask itself the questions of, is that work positive for the vision that you're pursuing or not? And then there's the risk management considerations. Is that the best place to put energy or not? Is there a brand risk for your organization or not to be associated with another private sector organization that may not be contributing to your vision? I don't think there's a single answer. I think every partnership is different, and that's what I would say.
Thank you. How about Dr. Cameron? Any of comments?
No, I think I would agree with what Nicolas mentioned. I think being true to the values of your organization, being true to your constituencies, is obviously vitally important when cooperating either with governments or with the private sector. Ensuring that your constituents have a voice in those decisions is very important as well.
Yeah, thank you. Any others? Jyotsna? Jyotsna, yes, please.
Thank you so much. We have a very different perspective. For private sector, the population, the people are market. For us, they are not market. They are people, they are human beings. So I think there's a class here, because our basic perspective about people is to work in partnership, to see them as human beings. So I think it's very important. But there are some good ways where we have seen there are some partnership between civil society and private sector. And private sector, they work through CSR. So CSR is one of those areas where we can find some ways out to work. At the same time, civil society needs to be very careful. Who do we work with? Because they have been working in a lot of work that we call unethical, like mining or extraction industries and becoming indigenous. So we have to be very careful who are we partnering with. There is no lack of money, but also there's lack of understanding about civil society and private sector, as Nicolas said before. So we also need to understand each other before working in partnership. I think these are some of those points that I would like to highlight. There have been partnerships happening at the local level, but with the increasing shrinking space, it's important for us to both sides to look at better options and to work in partnership, but looking at each other's background.
Thank you. Anyone? Oh, Anselmo, please.
Okay, thank you for the question, Jae-hyung. Jae-hyung, hello, long time no see. You look very formal. Okay, based on Korean experience, what we discussed in the panel was civil society partnership with the government, which is a public. But I think, as you rightly said, our partnership with the private sector also equally important. But traditionally, private sector CSO partnership has been unequal in the sense that, okay, private sector, they have money, and then CSO, you have a subcontractor, implementer, But this is an old model, In the time of SDG, I think we have to change this old paradigm. And there are two ways. One is, although private sector is for profit making, I think there should be a certain common principle respected by all actors. So if you look at the 2030 agenda of the UN, and there's a paragraph 67, which specify, the role of private sector, where you can find UN guiding principle on business and human rights. I think that's very important. Already UN provide the common guideline for all the private sector engaging SDG. So I think there should be the common ground, common principle. Second one is we cannot leave our livelihood to private sector only. Because over the last 20, 30 years, many CSOs or some private sector working together, so-called social solidarity economy. That means CSO now engaging in the field of traditionally the domain of private sector. So we need to work together. So we need to maximizing expertise from private sector and government, civil society to create more social solidarity economy. I think there's an important area we can pursue as a CSO. So these are two suggestions I want to make. Thank you for your suggestion.
Thank you. So Jennifer, okay, your last one. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to add that it's simply about having clarity on how the interest of communities, the people, your beneficiaries. So as a lead test, I think the welfare of the people in the communities is what we can do in looking at partnerships with private sector. As I've mentioned in my input, we need to have a new voice into the private sector because it also involves the micro, small, and medium enterprises need support. So for us, international, we put the burden on proving the benefit of any partnership on what the people experience. So, and of course, differentiate the interests of corporations, funds, and of the interest of the small ones, those in the sector. So that's my few points. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you all of our speakers. Because this session time is up, so I'm going to close this session. So once again, thanks all of our speakers on spend their time to share with us their experiences. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.